Brr. "So you say you can't pay your rent," said the giant cowgirl to the rancher. Tom had been awake since the first light of dawn, as he had every morning for as long as he could remember. The wind carried the faint smell of dry grass and earth, a smell that had become part of his life on the ranch. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but they were the hands of a man who loved his land deeply. He had inherited the ranch from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. Each fence post, each stone wall, and every blade of grass seemed to carry a story of the family's history. But now, that legacy was under threat. The past few years had been unforgiving. Rainfall had grown less frequent, and the streams that once cut through the property like silver ribbons had shrunk to shallow trickles. Cattle prices had fallen sharply, and Tom had done everything he could to cut costs without sacrificing the care of his animals. Still, the bills kept coming, and the bank statements were harder to open each month. He had always been proud, a man who liked to solve his own problems, but now he felt the weight of worry pressing down on him. As he walked toward the barn, his boots crunching against the dry soil, he noticed the golden light of sunrise glinting on the fence rails.
There was a quiet beauty in the morning, and for a moment he allowed himself to forget the hardships.
The sound of the cattle lowing softly in the distance reminded him why he had chosen this life.
Every morning the ranch welcomed him like an old friend, forgiving his mistakes and offering small rewards for his care.
But today was different. As he reached the main road, he noticed something unusual. A tall figure was moving slowly across the horizon, her silhouette striking against the soft morning sky. She was unlike anyone Tom had ever seen. Her hat shaded her face, but there was something commanding about her posture, a sense of strength that seemed almost otherworldly. She moved with confidence, her long boots kicking up dust as she walked, and Tom found himself pausing to watch her. The townspeople had spoken in whispers about newcomers before, but this woman was unlike any stranger they had ever mentioned. She seemed larger than life, almost like a character from the stories he had read as a boy. The idea that someone like her could simply appear in this quiet town made him uneasy, yet curious. He wondered who she was, what brought her here, and why she seemed to carry the air of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Tom shook his head and tried to focus on his chores, but he could not stop glancing toward the road. The woman, now closer, walked past the few stores that made up the center of town. She did not rush, but each step seemed purposeful. The children playing outside stopped and stared, their laughter fading into whispers. Some of the older men tipped their hats, unsure whether to greet her or keep their distance. There was a tension in the air, a mixture of curiosity and caution. Tom returned to his barn, but the sound of hooves in the distance made him glance up again. The woman was now heading toward the general store, where the town's notices and advertisements were posted.
He knew that she would eventually notice him, and the thought made his stomach tighten.
He was not a man who liked to be confronted about his troubles, but he had a feeling that this woman might not wait for him to speak. Inside the barn, the familiar smells of hay, leather, and dust were comforting. He ran his hands over the worn saddle that had been his father's, remembering the days when his father would lead him on long rides across the property. There was a sense of pride in those memories, but also a pang of sadness for it. Tom had loved his father, and he had tried to live up to the example he left behind. But now, facing debts he could barely manage, he felt as though he were failing not only himself, but the generations before him who had poured their lives into this land. As he prepared to check on the cattle, he heard a voice behind him, clear and strong. "So you say you can't pay your rent?" Tom froze. "Brr." The words cut through the quiet of the barn, carrying a tone that was not angry but not forgiving either. He turned slowly, and there she was, the tall, commanding figure he had been watching. Her presence filled the space like sunlight, and her eyes, sharp and observant, met his. Tom's throat felt dry. He had not expected anyone to confront him so directly, especially not a stranger. Yet there was something in the way she spoke that demanded honesty. Brr. He swallowed and found his voice. Rasp.
I've been trying, ma'am. I've worked every day, but this year has been harder than most.
The rains didn't come. The cattle prices fell. I just don't have the money. The woman studied him carefully, her large hands resting on her hips. You're a hard-working man, she said finally, but hard work doesn't always pay the bills. Her voice was calm, yet carried authority. She looked around at the barn, the fields beyond, and the cattle grazing lazily in the distance. This is a fine place, a strong ranch, but it needs more than just hope to survive. Tom felt a mix of embarrassment and relief. Here was someone who understood the work, who could see the land and the effort he had put into it. Yet, at the same time, he felt exposed. He had always taken pride in being independent, in solving problems on his own. To admit he might fail was difficult, but the woman's presence made it impossible to hide the truth. For several minutes, they stood in silence. The early morning wind stirred the hay in the barn, carrying the faint scent of fresh earth. Tom noticed how her eyes moved over every detail, from the worn boards of the barn to the way the cattle moved in the pen. It was as if she could see the potential of the ranch, but also the cracks that had appeared over time. Finally, she spoke again. You can't do this alone, she said. Not if you want to keep this place alive. But maybe there's a way.
Are you willing to take help, or are you going to let it all slip away? Tom hesitated. The offer of help was both strange and comforting.
He had spent so many years relying solely on himself that the idea of letting someone else in felt risky. But he also knew that pride could be costly, and if he wanted to save the ranch, he might need to trust this woman. The morning stretched on, the sunlight climbing higher in the sky. Tom and the giant cowgirl remained in the barn, talking quietly about the land, the cattle, and the challenges that lay ahead. Though she had arrived as a stranger, her words brought a sense of clarity he had not felt in weeks. He began to see a path forward, a way to face the difficulties not alone, but with someone who could offer strength and knowledge he did not possess. As she finally tipped her hat and turned toward the road again, Tom felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this unexpected encounter was not a threat, but an opportunity. Perhaps the ranch, his family's legacy, could survive after all. And perhaps, just perhaps, this unusual woman, the giant cowgirl who had appeared like a force of nature, would become a part of that story, helping him to write the next chapter in the life of the land he loved so dearly. With the sun now fully rising, Tom returned to his chores with a renewed sense of determination. The wind carried the promise of change, and for the first time in a long while he believed that even the hardest days could bring unexpected allies. The ranch was still in danger, the debt still looming, but the encounter with the giant cowgirl had reminded him that life had a way of offering hope when it was needed most. And for Tom, that hope was worth every ounce of effort he could give. The town of Red River was small, quiet, and built on routine. Most people knew each other by name, and news traveled fast along the dusty streets. When the giant cowgirl Lila appeared the previous morning, people had whispered and stared, wondering who she was and what business she had in their town. By the next day, rumors had spread like wildfire. Some said she was a strict enforcer sent to collect unpaid rents, while others claimed she was a wandering hero, seeking out struggling ranchers to help them survive. Desperation. Tom, however, had only one concern. She was standing at the edge of his property again, tall and imposing, her shadow stretching long across the dry earth. The morning sun was still low, casting golden light over the fields, and Tom was already outside checking the water troughs for the cattle. The animals moved sluggishly in the heat, their breaths slow and steady, but there was an anxious energy in the air. Desperation. He could feel it, as if they sensed the presence of someone unfamiliar. Lila approached slowly, her boots crunching against the dirt road. Bird. She carried no papers, no ledger, nothing that looked official, but there was no mistaking her authority. "So, you're the rancher who can't pay his rent?" Lila said, her voice carrying easily over the quiet morning. There was no malice in her tone, only a firmness that demanded attention. Tom paused, wiping sweat from his forehead, and looked at her. Brr. He had hoped she might leave, but now he had no choice but to speak honestly. I've been trying," he admitted, his voice low. "I work every day sunup to sundown, but this year, the drought hit hard and the prices for cattle dropped. I just don't have the money to pay. I know it's my responsibility, but—" His voice trailed off, embarrassed. He hated admitting weakness, but the truth was unavoidable. Bye. Lila studied him for a long moment. She had sharp eyes, the kind that seemed to look straight through a person and see what they were made of. "I've seen many ranchers like you," she said finally. "Men who work tirelessly yet find themselves falling behind." Brr. "Hard work alone doesn't always keep a ranch alive. You need planning, creativity, and sometimes inspiration." Oh. Tom's eyebrows knitted together. Desperage. Help. I'm not sure what you mean. Desperation. He had spent his life fending for himself. Trusting someone else with his livelihood was a foreign thought, and the idea made him uneasy. Brr. Yet he couldn't deny the truth in her words. He had tried to manage everything on his own, and look where it had brought him, staring down the possibility of losing his family's land. Brash. Lila nodded slowly. "I'm not here to take your land or punish you." Desperation. "I'm here because I can help, but only if you're willing to accept it." Are you— Tom hesitated. He wanted to say yes, wanted to grasp any chance of saving the ranch, but pride and fear held him back. Desperation. I don't know," he confessed. "It's hard to trust someone I've just met." Desperation. "And I've made mistakes, yes, but this is my land. I've been trying to fix things my way." Berate. Lila smiled faintly, a gesture that was almost humanizing despite her imposing presence. "I know it is your land, and I respect that. But even the strongest men need allies. And sometimes the right ally can make all the difference."
She paused, letting the words sink in. "You have strength, knowledge, and determination."
"I can bring strength, experience, and ideas. Together we could save this ranch."
The offer hung in the air like a delicate balance. Tom looked around at the land he had tended his entire life. The fences needed repair. The barn showed signs of age, and the fields were parched in places where the sun had scorched the soil. His pride told him to say no, to continue struggling alone, but his heart whispered that he couldn't do it without help. Desperation. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. Desperation. I'll take your help. But I warn you, I've never had anyone work with me like this before. Things might be difficult." Desperation. Lila's smile widened slightly. Difficult is the nature of ranching, she said. But if you're ready to work, I'll show you some ways to make it better. You won't have to face this alone. Over the next few days, Tom and Lila began to work side by side. At first, the townspeople watched from a distance, unsure what to make of the giant cowgirl helping the struggling rancher. Some shook their heads, believing it to be a fleeting attempt, destined to fail.
Others whispered that maybe she was a blessing sent to restore the land and help Tom survive. Their work began with the basics, repairing fences, checking water sources, and inspecting the cattle for health issues.
Lila's presence was intimidating at first. She could lift heavy beams, mend broken gates, and calm the more restless cattle with a steady voice. Tom had grown used to handling everything himself, but he quickly realized that with her help, tasks that had once taken days could now be done in hours.
It wasn't just physical work, though.
Lila had ideas, ways of improving the ranch that Tom had never considered. She suggested rotating the cattle to prevent overgrazing, using parts of the land to grow supplemental feed, and even negotiating with neighboring ranchers to trade resources rather than spending money.
At first, Tom resisted some of her ideas. Change was uncomfortable, and he had spent years doing things a certain way.
But slowly, he began to see the sense in her methods. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they paused to rest. Tom leaned against a fence post, exhausted but feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Lila stood beside him, watching the cattle move across the fields. "You know," she said, "this ranch has a lot of potential. It just needs someone willing to see it." Tom smiled faintly. "I wanted to see it too, Brass. I guess I just didn't know how." Lila's presence brought more than just physical help. She brought perspective. That she asked questions that made Tom think, encouraged him to plan ahead rather than simply reacting to problems. And, slowly, he found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He shared stories of his father and grandfather, of the dreams they had for the land, and of the struggles that had brought him to this moment. Lila listened patiently, offering advice and encouragement without judgment. But it wasn't all easy. Challenges arose almost immediately. A sudden summer storm damaged part of the barn, forcing them to work long hours to repair it before it collapsed. Some of the cattle became sick, requiring careful attention and treatment. And, as always, the weight of unpaid rent and looming debts lingered in Tom's mind. There were moments of frustration, when tempers flared and both felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. But through it all, they persisted, finding solutions and growing stronger as a team. The townspeople began to notice the change. Where once Tom had appeared worn and defeated, he now moved with purpose, his eyes bright with determination. Lila's reputation grew as well. People whispered about the tall, confident cowgirl who had come to town and helped the struggling rancher.
Children watched them work with fascination while older men nodded with approval, realizing that this partnership might just save the ranch.
By the end of the week, small but significant progress had been made. Broken fences were repaired, water troughs were cleaned and refilled, and the cattle were healthier and calmer. Tom began to see the results of hard work combined with smart planning. He had always believed in himself, but now he understood that believing in someone else, even just enough to accept help, could be just as powerful. That night, as the stars appeared one by one in the clear western sky, Tom sat outside his cabin and reflected on the day. The giant cowgirl had changed more than just the ranch. She had changed him. She had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness, that asking for help did not diminish his strength, and she had reminded him that even in the harshest conditions, hope could be found in unexpected places. Bray.
Lila, standing nearby with her hat tipped against the starlight, seemed to understand without words. There was a quiet partnership forming between them, built on trust, respect, and a shared determination to save the ranch.
For Tom, this was more than just a chance to pay the rent or repair fences. It was a chance to reclaim his future, to honor his family's legacy, and to discover that sometimes the right person at the right time could make all the difference. And so, as the night settled over Red River, Tom felt a cautious but genuine optimism.
The road ahead would be hard, and many challenges awaited, but with Lila by his side, he knew he was not alone.
For the first time in a long while, he believed that the ranch could survive, and maybe, just maybe, it could thrive again.
The days passed quickly on Tom's ranch, but they were never easy.
By now, the partnership between Tom and Lila had grown stronger. They had begun to find a rhythm, a way to complement each other's strengths. Brave. Tom brought years of experience, an intimate knowledge of the land, and a steady hand when dealing with the cattle. Lila brought strength, strategy, and an energy that seemed boundless, as if she carried the spirit of the land itself in her stride. Together, they tackled the work that had once felt impossible for Tom alone. But the peace was fragile. Word had spread through Red River about the progress Tom was making with Lila's help. While some townspeople offered quiet support, others viewed the changes with suspicion or envy. Among them was a neighboring rancher named Hank, a man known for his sharp tongue and competitive nature. He had watched Tom struggle for years and had often mocked his misfortune. Seeing Tom gain confidence and improve the ranch so quickly angered Hank. He could not understand how a single stranger, a giant cowgirl, could help someone like Tom rise again. Hank began to plot subtle ways to undermine them. He spread rumors that the ranch was using unfair practices, suggested to buyers that Tom's livestock was unhealthy, and tried to discourage workers from assisting them. At first, Tom tried to ignore it, focusing on the land and cattle, trusting that honesty and hard work would be enough. Lila, however, saw the danger clearly. "This isn't just about the land," she said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her forehead. "People don't like seeing change they don't understand. Hank is trying to push us down. We have to be ready for more than just the work itself."
The first real challenge came unexpectedly. A sudden summer storm swept through the valley, bringing torrential rain and fierce winds.
The fences that Tom and Lila had worked so hard to repair were battered. A portion of the barn's roof was ripped away, leaving the interior vulnerable to the elements. The cattle were frightened, bellowing loudly as lightning flashed across the sky. Tom and Lila ran from the cabin to secure what they could. Their boots sank into mud, their clothes soaked through, but they pressed on, working tirelessly to protect the animals and the property.
"Hold this beam!" Lila shouted over the roar of the wind.
Her strength made it possible to secure the heaviest planks while Tom nailed them into place. The teamwork they had built over the past weeks was now a lifeline. Without her, Tom knew he could not have saved the barn or calmed the panicked cattle. Even as fear threatened to overwhelm them, their determination held firm. By the time the storm passed, the ranch bore the marks of the fight. Fences were bent, the barn had sustained some damage, and the ground was waterlogged. Tom looked around exhausted, feeling the weight of the setback. But he also looked at Lila, who was calmly assessing the situation, already planning the repairs for the next day. "We'll fix this," she said, her voice steady. "It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is."
As they worked to repair the storm damage over the next few days, another challenge arose: illness among the cattle.
Several of the younger calves showed signs of weakness and refused to eat. Tom's heart sank. Losing livestock could undo months of progress. Lila stayed by his side, helping him identify the symptoms, administer remedies, and care for the sick animals. It was painstaking work, but with patience and diligence, they nursed the calves back to health. Each small recovery felt like a victory, strengthening their confidence and deepening their bond. Amid the physical challenges, tensions occasionally flared between them. Lila's methods, though effective, were sometimes unconventional, and Tom struggled to accept ideas that went against years of tradition.
We can't just rely on theory, he argued one evening, wiping mud from his hands.
I've been managing this land my entire life. I know what works and what doesn't.
Lila met his gaze evenly.
And I respect that, she said. But we have to adapt.
The land has changed. The weather has changed. And so have the circumstances. If we do things the same way we always have, we'll fail. Trust me. Give these ideas a chance. You'll see results. Slowly, Tom began to understand. He saw how their combined strengths created solutions neither could have achieved alone. He tried her methods, sometimes reluctantly, and often they worked better than he had expected. In those moments, he felt a quiet admiration for Lila, not just for her skill, but for her patience, her determination, and the way she seemed to see possibilities where he had only seen obstacles. Then came the moment that would test them more than any storm or sickness had. Hank, the rival rancher, took a bold step. He purchased several plots of land that bordered Tom's ranch, land that provided critical access to water and grazing areas. With this move, he effectively limited Tom's ability to expand or rotate his cattle safely. It was a calculated attack, designed to put pressure on Tom and make his ranch less viable. Tom felt a wave of despair. He had worked so hard to rebuild, and now it seemed as if all their efforts could be undermined by one man's greed.
Lila, however, remained calm. "This isn't the end," she said firmly.
"We'll find another way. The land is yours, and you've done the work."
That gives us options he doesn't have. Let's think carefully and act wisely. Over the next few days, they assessed the situation. They walked the boundaries, examined alternative water sources, and devised new plans for grazing that maximized the available space.
Lila even suggested approaching neighboring ranchers who might be willing to trade or lease sections of land temporarily. Tom had never considered such collaboration. He had always seen other ranchers as competitors, not partners.
But with Lila's guidance, he realized that cooperation could be more powerful than conflict. As they implemented these new strategies, another unexpected challenge arose. A fire broke out in a dry patch of grass near the southern edge of the property. Flames spread quickly, threatening the newly repaired fences and the grazing cattle. Tom and Lila worked side by side, guiding the animals to safety and dousing the fire with buckets of water. It was exhausting, dangerous work, but it reinforced a vital lesson. The ranch's survival depended on their ability to act together, to trust each other completely, and to face danger without hesitation. By the end of the week, the ranch had endured storms, illness, rival attacks, and fire. Yet, despite these trials, Tom began to see real progress. The fences were stronger, the cattle healthier, and the land more carefully managed than it had been in years. But perhaps more importantly, Tom felt a transformation within himself. He had learned to trust, to adapt, and to see the value of partnership. Lila had taught him that resilience was not just about working harder, but also about thinking smarter and accepting help when it was needed. The townspeople began to take notice. Children who once watched with curiosity now cheered as Tom and Lila moved through the fields with the cattle. Older ranchers nodded with respect, acknowledging the skill and determination it took to survive so many challenges in such a short time. Even Hank, who had tried to undermine them, began to realize that his efforts might not succeed. Tom and Lila were more than just a struggling rancher and a mysterious stranger. They were a team, capable of facing any obstacle together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Tom and Lila sat on a fence, catching their breath. The ranch stretched out before them, showing signs of the hard work they had done. Tom felt a quiet sense of pride. Brr. I never thought I could face so many problems at once, he admitted. And yet, Bray, here we are. The ranch is still standing, and we're still standing. Desperation. Lila smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. That's the way of things, she said. Bert, ranching isn't easy, but nothing worth keeping ever is. You've done more than survive. You've learned to adapt, to fight, and to trust. Inspiration.
Those lessons are worth more than any money or land. They'll carry you forward no matter what comes next.
Inspiration. For the first time in months, Tom felt truly hopeful. He realized that the challenges, though harsh, had strengthened him and prepared him for whatever lay ahead. And he knew, deep down, that Leela had been the catalyst for this change. She had entered his life unexpectedly, challenged his pride, and guided him toward a better path. Without her, he might still be struggling alone, overwhelmed by the weight of debt and despair. As night fell and stars appeared in the vast western sky, Tom made a quiet promise to himself.
He would continue to work tirelessly, protect the land, and honor the legacy of his family.
But he would also embrace the lessons he had learned, that strength comes in many forms, that trust and partnership can be as valuable as hard work, and that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope could be found in unexpected places. And so, the ranch stood firm against storms, rivalries, and fire, not because the work was easy, but because Tom and Lila faced every challenge together. Their bond had grown, forged in sweat, determination, and the shared goal of saving a home worth fighting for. The turning point had come, and they had survived it. The story of Tom's ranch was no longer just about struggle. It was now a story of resilience, courage, and the power of unexpected alliances. The weeks after the storm and the fire were a mixture of triumph and hard lessons. Tom and Lila had survived what many would have considered impossible. But the challenges were far from over. The ranch was no longer just a place to work. It had become a test of endurance, patience, and creativity. Every day brought new obstacles, and Tom realized that the journey to save his family's legacy would demand more than strength. It required wisdom, resilience, and a heart willing to adapt. It began with the land itself. The storm had washed away patches of topsoil, leaving the fields uneven and vulnerable. Certain sections of grass had been destroyed, meaning there was less grazing space for the cattle. Tom spent hours walking the property, surveying the damage, and planning repairs. He found himself relying on Lila's insight more and more. Whereas she could spot problems he had overlooked, suggesting ways to rotate the animals or plant temporary feed crops to preserve the land.
You've got to think ahead, Lila reminded him one morning as they measured the fields.
The cattle can survive today, but what about next month or next year? Her words reminded him that surviving the immediate crisis was not enough. The ranch had to thrive over time, and that meant planning for the future, not just reacting to emergencies. He realized that his stubbornness had often held him back, forcing him to deal with one problem at a time without considering the bigger picture. Lila's presence changed that. She didn't just help with work, she helped him see the potential of what they could accomplish together. But it wasn't just the land that challenged them.
The community of Red River, while supportive in many ways, still carried whispers of doubt. Some townspeople questioned why Tom was working with a stranger.
Why let someone else handle your business? They asked. Others were skeptical of Lila herself, unsure if her intentions were genuine. These murmurs sometimes reached Tom's ears, and he felt the sting of judgment.
Desperation. Lila, however, remained unbothered.
People will always talk, she said one evening as they repaired a damaged fence under a fading sun.
It's not their ranch. It's ours, and we know what's best.
Desperation. Ignore them, or use it to remind yourself why this work matters.
But the pressure was real.
More than once, he stayed up late into the night, thinking about the financial strain, the upcoming rent, and the constant need to maintain the ranch. Lila, sensing his worry, would quietly sit beside him, offering words of encouragement or simply a reassuring presence.
There was comfort in knowing he was not alone, even when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him.
One of the most difficult moments came when one of their cattle, a prized bull named Jasper, became seriously ill.
The animal was crucial for breeding and maintaining the herd, and losing it would have been devastating. Tom had cared for Jasper since the calf was born, and he felt a deep sense of helplessness. Lila helped him tend to the bull, suggesting remedies, monitoring his health, and staying alert through the nights when the illness was at its worst.
Sometimes it's not about what we can do, Lila said quietly as they worked through another restless night.
It's about what we refuse to give up on.
Her words sank deep into Tom's heart. He realized that saving the ranch was not just about repairs, fences, or cattle. It was about commitment, resilience, and the refusal to surrender, no matter how difficult the path became.
By morning, Jasper's condition had stabilized, and both Tom and Lila felt a surge of relief and quiet pride. Yet even as they celebrated small victories, new challenges emerged. Hank, the rival rancher, continued to create problems. He had spread word that Tom's ranch was struggling despite Lila's assistance, trying to drive away potential buyers and suppliers. One morning, a shipment of hay that Tom had arranged was delayed, and the blame fell on the rumors Hank had started. Without enough feed, the younger cattle risked becoming weak or ill, threatening the progress they had worked so hard to achieve. Tom felt frustration boil inside him. Why can't people just focus on their own work? He muttered as he unloaded the late hay, his hands shaking from exhaustion and anger. Lila placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Because some people fear what they can't control, she said. Hank's actions come from envy and insecurity. Don't let it shake you. We know the truth. We know the work we've done. Focus on that. Tom took a deep breath, realizing she was right. There was nothing he could do to control Hank's jealousy, only how he responded to it. They worked together to reorganize the feed schedule, rationing hay carefully to ensure all the cattle remained healthy. By the end of the week, the herd was thriving again, and the delays had caused no permanent damage.
Amid these practical challenges, Tom began to reflect on the emotional journey he was undergoing.
The partnership with Lila was changing him in ways he had never expected. He had always been a proud, independent man, hesitant to ask for help or trust others with his responsibilities. Now he found that accepting support did not diminish his strength, it enhanced it. Lila's presence had shown him that true resilience came not from stubbornness, but from the ability to adapt, to learn, and to face difficulties with both courage and wisdom. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, Tom and Lila sat by the creek at the edge of the ranch. The water flowed gently, reflecting the colors of the sky, and a sense of peace settled over them. Tom looked at Lila, her silhouette tall and unwavering against the fading light. I never imagined someone like you would come into my life, he admitted quietly. And I never imagined I'd need help this much. But, I'm glad you're here. "It's not just about me," she said. "It's about what we can do together." Ration. You've done the work, and you've learned the lessons. I just help you see them more clearly. The days continued with both victories and struggles. Some nights were spent repairing fences damaged by wind, others tending to sick cattle or navigating conflicts with rival ranchers. Each challenge strengthened the bond between Tom and Lila, building a partnership rooted not only in practicality, but also in trust, respect, and shared determination. Through it all, the town of Red River began to see a change as well. Berg. Where once there had been doubt and skepticism, people started to admire the resilience and hard work displayed by Tom and Lila. Children would watch them moving together through the fields, learning lessons about perseverance, teamwork, and courage. Operations. Older ranchers began to approach Tom for advice, seeing that even someone who had struggled could rise again with determination and the right guidance. By the end of Part 4, the ranch was no longer just surviving. It was growing stronger. The land was healthier, the cattle were thriving, and the improvements they had made were visible to anyone who walked through the property. But beyond the tangible successes, the greatest change was in Tom himself. He had learned to accept help without losing pride, to trust without fear, and to face obstacles with a calm determination. Lila had become more than a partner in work. She had become a guide, a mentor, and a friend. Her presence reminded Tom that life's challenges were not meant to be faced alone, and that true strength came from collaboration, persistence, and hope. Together they had weathered storms, illness, sabotage, and fire, and yet the ranch remained standing, more resilient than ever. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, and illuminating the repaired fences and thriving cattle, Tom felt a quiet but profound sense of accomplishment. The journey was far from over, but he knew that with Lila by his side, the ranch had a fighting chance. More than that, he realized that their shared struggles had forged something lasting, a bond of trust, respect, and hope that could withstand any challenge that the future might bring. The land was no longer just a place to live. It was a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the rewards of working together. And in that moment, standing beside the giant cowgirl who had changed everything, Tom understood that the greatest victories were not only measured in fences repaired or cattle saved, but in the lessons learned, the trust built, and the hope that carried them forward into an uncertain but promising future. The early morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of earth and grass. Tom stepped outside his cabin, stretching his arms toward the sky, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. A ranch, once struggling and vulnerable, now hummed with quiet life. The cattle moved freely across the pastures, the fences stood firm, and the barn, fully repaired, cast long shadows in the morning sun. The property seemed almost alive, as if it recognized the hard work and care that had been poured into it.
Lila was already near the water trough, checking that all the animals had clean water and were eating well.
She glanced at Tom and gave a small nod, a silent signal that she was ready to begin another day of work. Together they walked the fields, inspecting the progress made over the past months. The improvements were undeniable. Where the land had once been worn and fragile, it now looked strong, managed, and cared for. Tom felt a deep sense of pride, but he also knew that none of this would have been possible without Lila. Over breakfast, Tom reflected on the journey they had undertaken. They had faced storms that threatened to wash away their labor, fires that could have destroyed everything, illness among the cattle that might have crippled the herd, and even sabotage from a jealous neighbor. Each obstacle had tested not only the ranch, but their resolve, patience, and trust in one another. And yet, despite the challenges, the ranch had endured stronger than ever.
Lila joined him at the table, her presence calm and reassuring. "You've done well, Tom," she said.
The land is thriving, the cattle are healthy, and the foundation for the future is solid. But more importantly, you've grown too. Narration.
You've learned to adapt, to trust, and to face challenges without fear. That's something no one can take away from you.
Tom smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. He realized she was right.
Narration. While the physical work had been exhausting, the lessons learned along the way had been just as important. Narration. He had discovered that pride could coexist with humility, that strength could be shared without losing independence, and that perseverance often required both wisdom and collaboration. Leela had taught him that resilience was not just about surviving. It was about learning, growing, and preparing for the future. The town of Red River had begun to take notice of the transformation as well. People who had once whispered doubts now approached Tom with respect and admiration. Neighbors offered assistance, sharing resources, or trading supplies to help maintain the improvements. Children watched with wide eyes as the ranch thrived, learning that hard work, determination, and cooperation could overcome even the toughest obstacles. And even Hank, the rival rancher, seemed to acknowledge that his attempts to undermine Tom had failed. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the fields in golden light, Tom and Lila stood together at the edge of the property, surveying the progress. The fences were strong, the pastures lush, and the herd healthy and calm. Birds sang in the trees, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. For a moment, Tom allowed himself to simply take in the beauty of the land, appreciating not only its recovery but the journey that had brought him here. "It's hard to believe this is the same place," Tom said quietly. "Just a few months ago, I didn't know if we could save it. And now—"
He trailed off, letting the sight of the thriving ranch speak for itself.
Lila smiled, a rare softness in her expression. "Change takes time and effort," she said. But when you face challenges head-on, with honesty and courage, it's always possible to create something stronger than before. This ranch is proof of that. Their work continued, not out of necessity alone, but because they had grown attached to the land in a way that went beyond responsibility. Each day brought a sense of accomplishment and a reminder that the struggles they had endured were part of the story of the ranch. They repaired fences, nurtured the pastures, and ensured the cattle remained healthy. They also began to plan for the future, considering ways to make the ranch more sustainable, productive, and secure. One morning, a letter arrived from the landowner, addressed to Tom. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, he opened it, expecting bad news or a demand for overdue rent. But instead, the letter acknowledged the improvements made on the property and the efforts Tom and Lila had invested. The landowner expressed confidence that the ranch would continue to thrive under Tom's care, and offered leniency on the rent for the coming months, recognizing the progress and resilience they had shown. Tom felt a surge of relief and gratitude. The acknowledgement validated their hard work, but more importantly, it symbolized a turning point, a recognition that dedication, perseverance, and collaboration could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. He shared the news with Lila, who smiled knowingly.
"See," she said, "hard work, determination, and partnership always pay off in the end." Despite the external validation, the greatest reward for Tom was the personal growth he had experienced.
He had learned to trust someone else, to accept help without feeling weak, and to face challenges with patience and courage. Lila's presence had been transformative, teaching him that even the strongest individuals could benefit from guidance, collaboration, and support. The community continued to take notice. Local families visited the ranch, inspired by the story of resilience and teamwork. While adults found hope in seeing a struggling rancher rise again. Tom and Lila became symbols of determination, showing that even in the face of adversity, progress and recovery were possible with effort and cooperation. Inspiration. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Tom and Lila sat by the edge of the pasture, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The cattle grazed peacefully, the fences gleamed in the soft light, and the land seemed calm and vibrant. Tom reflected on the journey. The storms, the fires, the illness, the rivalries, and the long nights of worry and hard work. Inspiration. Every challenge had taught him something valuable, and every obstacle had brought him closer to understanding the importance of partnership, resilience, and hope.
You know, Tom said quietly, I don't think I could have done this without you.
Lila tipped her hat slightly, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset.
And you wouldn't have been able to do it without yourself, she said.
I can guide you, support you, and help you see possibilities. But all the work, all the decisions, and all the courage came from you. Tom nodded, understanding the truth of her words. The ranch had been saved not by magic or luck, but by determination, hard work, and the courage to accept help when it was needed. He had faced his fears, learned new ways of thinking, and discovered that success often came from collaboration rather than solitary effort. The coming months were filled with continued progress. The ranch became more productive, and the improvements they had implemented ensured sustainability for years to come. Tom continued to manage the land carefully, always learning, always adapting.
Lila remained by his side, not just as a helper, but as a trusted partner and friend.
Together, they celebrated successes, solved problems, and nurtured the land that had become a symbol of their shared perseverance. One day, as Tom stood looking across the fields, he realized that the ranch was more than just a place to live or a family legacy. It was a reflection of resilience, hard work, and the power of trust and cooperation. Every repaired fence, every healthy calf, and every flourishing pasture represented a victory over adversity and a testament to the lessons he had learned. And while challenges would inevitably come again, Tom knew that they were no longer insurmountable. With Lila by his side, he could face storms, rivalries, and unexpected problems with confidence. Together, they had turned a struggling ranch into a thriving homestead, and in the process, they had transformed their own lives as well. The story of the ranch became known throughout Red River, not only as a tale of land and cattle, but as a story of human resilience, courage, and the power of partnership. Tom's journey from desperation to hope inspired others, reminding them that even when life seems overwhelming, determination, cooperation, and a willingness to accept help can create change beyond imagination. As night fell over the valley, the stars twinkling in a clear western sky, Tom and Lila sat quietly, reflecting on all that had been accomplished. The ranch, once teetering on the brink of failure, now stood as a symbol of triumph, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. And in that moment, Tom understood a truth that would stay with him forever. The greatest victories are not just measured in wealth or land, but in the lessons learned, the bonds formed, and the hope that carries us forward through every challenge life presents. With the gentle wind rustling through the trees and the soft sounds of cattle grazing, Tom smiled, knowing that the ranch and his life was secure.
The journey had been long and filled with trials, but the rewards were profound.
Brave. The land thrived, the cattle flourished, and most importantly, Tom had grown into a man who knew the value of trust, partnership, and perseverance. And as he looked at Lila, the giant cowgirl who had appeared in his life at just the right moment, he knew that this chapter of his life, though hard-fought, had become one of the most meaningful and transformative experiences he had ever known.